Alrighty, so welcome back uh to the Games Clown Club. Just before we get into it, I just want to do a quick little run through of some of the stuff we want to do this semester, some of the plans we got for world domination, and right before that, just some little tiny amount of housekeeping, just like a pinch of salt of housekeeping. And that housekeeping is if you haven't filled this out, please do so. We're going to be submitting it in the next couple days. So if you have not filled out the general member form and you want this on your record, make sure you fill it out. Make sure you fill it out correctly. Um, and yeah, that's all she wrote there. Um, yeah, just fill this out in the next like day, preferably. And then, yeah, this will be on your record. And now onto the really cool things. Um, so as you'd expect, we want to keep you interested in game sound here at the Game Sound Club, and we definitely want to go through this semester with absolute bangers every single session, getting you all the best information we can. Um, so here's a quick peek at what we're looking for, and in honor of getting you the best information we could, we got even more guest speakers this time around. We got twice as many as we did last time, so this time we got two. They'll be announced in the future, probably like in the next week or at next session, most likely. And we got this session today, which is about project management. It is something that has genuinely changed my outlook on just making my audio projects. Like, it's been insanely helpful in the past month or so that I've been actually putting this into practice. Um, and next week I want to do a big one on Unity Audio and just kind of just go over everything for it. Uh, and same thing with FMod, just really hammer in everything that we can, get you all the information you need to do your best stuff. We have a big music theory session. It'll be a bit more information than last year. Some information will probably be taken out. We're going to try to get as much in there as possible. And real-time sound design and composing workflows just for some fun. And hopefully more, but this is likely it because of time. But as you can see, there's a lot here. And the two guest speakers we have coming in, they're both amazing at what they do. Obviously, they're in the industry. They're great guys. You'll really enjoy it. It'll be super helpful. So, getting right into today's session. Like I said earlier, project management and game audio, which isn't really something that's talked about too often. It's kind of one of those things that you don't expect to think about. Um, and project management in general isn't really something you think about. It's just something that happens behind the scenes until Hamraj joins your team or reads one book about project management. But it's super important, and you'll understand why by the end of this. So just a quick overview. It doesn't look like a lot, but as Anthony was kind of alluding to earlier, it's packed full of information as usual for these sessions. Um, there will be a lot covered, so generally there probably will be a thing or two you miss. So always I recommend going back, watching this again once it's up on YouTube. Um, and yeah, the sooner you start with all this, the better. So yeah, let's get right into it to not halt it any longer. So just getting started with asset management. Got a bit of a grind set quote there to get you inspired. And just to start off, libraries. So as sound designers, sound people, music people, whatever we're doing, you're going to have libraries that you buy from places, you download for free, whatever you do, wherever you get them, you're going to get them somehow. So just having them all in a root folder that's easily accessible. So like, mine, for example, is literally just on the root of the D drive. You can have it in documents, you can have it anywhere really. But just having one easily accessible spot that's just audio libraries and that's where you dump everything is a really good idea to have. And specifically for third-party libraries, a naming scheme I've found pretty useful is the name of the company or website that you got it from, followed by the name of the library. because if it's just everything's name, how you downloaded it, it gets really muddy really quick, and it's really easy to lose track of everything you have, especially when you get a lot. So just doing that keeps it organized. It helps you if you want to look for it later. And this, like I say in the last point, it's definitely something you want to do early, because organizing a giant library is a lot more difficult than a smaller, just starting out library. And on the flip side of that, you also have your personal libraries of sounds that you record outside, in your backyard, in your room, wherever you do it. So what I like to do is I like to have a raw folder. Usually I just start it with an underscore, so it's just right at the top of everything. And that's where I stick the unedited and just raw recordings of everything. And then when I edit everything down, I put those in like subfolders just to go through each step of the process. And then when I export it, I put them into what we're going to talk about in a second. So beyond that, I organize it based on category. So I've got the ambience folder, and in that ambience folder, I've got birds, which are just short little things of birds chirping. Forest, which is just like 30-second loops in a forest. Lab room, that's literally just me in the game lab in the middle of the night one day when I just recorded it, and so on. So, and in some of those folders, actually, I do have subfolders even beyond that. So, like rain, for example, I have one-shots of rain where it's transitions, and then I have a loops folder where it's just rain at a certain intensity, just continuing to go. So just having a lot of folders, yes, it's a lot of management, but it is really great for keeping organized. And an example I use here is footsteps. So for my footsteps folder, I went out and recorded a ridiculous amount of footsteps for our game last year, on pretty much everything that you can think of. So grass, gravel, pavement, rocks, a tree that fell over, mud, everything like that. And each of those obviously has its own folder. But alongside all those categories, having a folder for designed sounds, so that sounds you create artificially, or sounds that you create by taking multiple sounds and then making them something with layering. Just having a separate folder for that will let you know, hey, this isn't the raw base recording. This is the raw recording with effects on it, with extra layers, or it's just something completely synthetic. And miscellaneous sounds. So if you just record a one-time thing, like I think in mine I have something like putting down a brick or something like that, just something I don't have anywhere else, that's where it would go. So moving forward, with folder structure, we got game ready assets. So this is the stuff, like once you've got everything edited, once it's ready to be put into Fmod or into Unity or wherever, this is what you're going to want to do with this. And the pictures I have here are just an example from Earthlight project folder. And on the side there's all the subfolders in Fmod. So obviously you start with the project folder. So in this case it would have been Earthlight. That's the root folder. Using underscores or number prefixes, once again, is really good for organization. So if you have a raw folder or an audition folder, you just put an underscore at the front of that, and then boom, it's right at the top. You don't need to look for it. As well as having an audition folder, it's really useful to have an outdated or an archive folder, just in case if you want to keep a hang on of previous versions of a sound, anything that's unused. If you change your mind later, or if you think of a use for it, you still have it. You don't need to recreate it. And once again, just having folders for each type of asset. So what I did was ambient, characters with a lot of subfolders in it. So like one subfolder for each of the playable characters, and then subfolders there for each type of sound they made. So just a lot of folders again, but it really helps with staying organized, and that's really the name of the game with this session. And now the last step, we got fmod, or whatever middleware you're using, the assets folder for that. And if you're using, let's say, no middleware, you're just using straight raw into Unity, this would be wherever the audio folder is, or whatever you want to call it. When you make an fmod project, it creates the assets folder. This is where you put it. Like I said, having an auditioning folder, just in case you want to try something out, that's really useful. As well as testing out additional layering, just in case you don't like how something sounds exactly in the context of fmod. Because that can happen, that you make a sound, everything's perfect, and then you put it in and you're like, I don't know, it could use something else. So having like a kick drum in there, maybe, if you want an extra punch, because I know that layering kicks onto something like impactful, like a gunshot or a punch, is really useful for, obviously, or not obviously, generally adding an extra punch to the sound. And once again, organize based on type and category, and we will expand on what that MX and SX and what all the acronyms and stuff mean in a few minutes. But right before that, file naming. So you have all your folders. There's going to be files in those folders. They should be named. So for libraries, generally, as you'd expect, when you download a library off the internet, it'll already have a naming convention. Everything will be exactly how the person wanted it to be. So you could go through and change all that to your liking, but that is a giant pain, and I do not recommend that, just because you'll waste a lot of time. But generally what I do is I try to be very specific, and that helps me remember what exactly it is I recorded, but at the same time have a lot of information. So this big gray block in the middle, that's currently the best format I've adopted. So most of my library, when I made this presentation, because I went through and changed it all like a madman, was like just birds 1, birds 2, not at all just readable. It's super vague. I don't know what it means by birds 1 or birds 2. Like, is it a bird flying? Is it birds squawking at me because I'm standing in a tree or something? I don't know what it is. But all it says is what it is, very vaguely, and then the number of it. So I built it up a bit more. I added more information. I made it more readable. So that not only do I look smarter when I say, oh yes, this is my big file name, but it's also more useful when you look at it. So birds 1 versus lake waves from 5 meters, 96 kilohertz loop 1. I know exactly what that is. It's a loop. I was standing 5 meters roughly away from the lake, and that's the sample rate. While that's amazing, it's still not quite enough information, because I don't know, okay, is it stereo, is it mono, is it 24-bit, 16-bit, 12-bit? I don't know. So the one on the right is great in terms of everything past the actual description of it. The only issue I have with it is that tape measure isn't specific enough, because a lot of it's like clicking or like zipping it out. I did a lot of sounds, but there's also like 95 sounds in that folder, so that would be a pain to go through. But the point is, you're going to want to experiment. You're going to want to find something that works well for you and something that you can keep very organized with. Because at the end of the day, staying organized just makes it easier for you to find stuff. And in your library, that's the whole point. You're going to want to find stuff in it. So a little bit different. Game ready assets do have a different naming convention for me, and from what I've seen, they generally do. So just instead of being incredibly specific, you just got to stick it in a very broad category to start off, and then go a bit more specific and chop off all the information that's not needed. So like the sample rate, the bit rate, all that I included, you don't need to care about that. Just generally what I've learned to do from a GDC talk that I will talk about a lot, for the rest of the session. Um, what they do is they have three acronyms here. There's SX for sound effects, MX for music, and then VX for voiceover or dialogue. And generally what that is that's just stuck at the beginning of anything that's a file, which is expanded on in the next slide where we talk about the categories. So right after the SX, MX, whatever it is, that's where the category acronym would be. So once again, this is taken directly from that same GDC talk. I will link it in resources later. It is incredibly useful. It was a great talk. But these are just general categories to pick from. You can add some, you can take some away. But the basic idea of this is that this covers most of the bases. And it's pretty useful because you look at it, you look at ENV and you immediately think, okay, that's environment or something like that. An ambient, I used the word amb to describe ambient even before I knew of this, so it was super helpful just to have a concrete thing to refer to. And once again from that GDC talk, the full name of files would generally vary, and I did tweak this a little bit. But generally what they would do for sound effects is SX and then the level, and then the category that it's in. So SX island int, it's an interactable item on the island level, and it's a sound effect. And then the next three things, you got the source, action, O1. So that's obviously the source of the sound, so it's coming from a chest. The action of it is the chest opening, and it's the first iteration of it. No further changes were needed. And similarly with music, it's MX level category, so it's the island ambience music track. Then you got the descriptor and the interactivity. So this is very dependent on the form of adaptive music used. So you could absolutely omit some of this if you don't have a ton of music. Like for example, in Earthlight, I wrote around 6 to 15 minutes of music per level, with a linear progression through each of the sections in the case of all but one level. So for something like that, what I could have done if I was adopting this system is go for MX level, descriptor, and then ABC 1, 2, 3, whatever I was using. And last but not least, dialogue, voiceover. Very similarly, it's VX, but then it's category instead of the level, since usually dialogue isn't level dependent. But if it is, you can easily slop it in there. And then the character that says the dialogue, the descriptor, so what the line conveys, O1, and then the line number if you want to be that person. So this I found is pretty solid for usage. I use something very similar for Slight, but adapting this into this system would give me something like VX narrator pad 01. So it's voice lines start with VX. It's the narrator speaking, that's the character. It's the first data pad, and it's the first line spoken. So the next line would be 0102. Data pad 2, line 3 would be pad 02 underscore 03. Just something like that. And if you have different takes that you want different variation of, you can just add another underscore and then an 01 to the end of it if you wanted to. But yeah, this is generally a pretty decent file naming convention. It's worked for me so far to great success. And now onto the stuff that Hamraj loves. Spreadsheets, tasks, all that good stuff. I'm going to name drop Jira at least once. And yeah, this is the stuff Hamraj loves. So I hope you're happy.
Sacrifice children, huh?
Yeah. Probably. I don't know. I assume.
Not wrong.
Creative input. Anyways.
I don't think that's that bold of a claim.
It's a fairly general claim to make. It's not anything shocking.
Yeah. I
Alright.
understand.
Yeah. All right. So, child sacrifices aside, uh, what I have learned is easily the most helpful thing is these two words at the top, asset spreadsheet. I I kid you not, it has done the most to help my workflow since the invention of food. It has been like purely amazing. Like zero bad experiences with it so far. So Excel spreadsheets or Google Sheets, honestly perfect for this. Uh, do this first. This is absolutely one of the first things you should do with a project. Just go through absolutely everything. Think, okay, what needs a sound? What would play a sound? What should play a sound? What could be cut? If this could be cut, just maybe put it in a different list. Anything that's super necessary, so maybe have a priority queue on it. Um, but generally make sure you put every single asset in here because this is going to be the thing you refer to. Um, and it'll be a list to just work through, and you'll just keep referring to this, and it'll be great. So yeah, every asset in the game, every asset that you need in the game, every asset that should be in the game should be in this list. And each sound, so each row should correspond to an event. That's just how things work with Fmod. Um, I'm currently working on a project that's not using Fmod, so I did have to tweak it a bit. But generally, it still worked. If something would be a quote-unquote event in Fmod, it would be its own line. If there was a sound with layers to it, like there is in another game that I'm working on right now, it's so for that example, we have a grapple hook in the future game. So it's the startup sound and then the looping sound in the middle when you're reeling in, and then the end of grapple sound. So that's technically 3 sounds, but it's one event. So I'm only counting it as one. So that way it just helps with organization, that sort of thing. I feel like I've said organization way too many times today, but I do not care. But yeah, doing this first, just filling it out as early as you can in the project's lifespan, helps you build the shell of an Fmod project that much sooner and gets you that much closer to it being game ready. And even then, if you have that shell of a project, all you can do is just make placeholders. So just be like POW for a gunshot, or like low health if you die or if you take damage or something. Put those, like literally just you saying those, put those in the game, and that way you can test things. You can play test with sounds. You can say, okay, this thing needs feedback, let's make an event for this, or this plays way too often, let's not do this. Just having this spreadsheet leads to the shell of the project, which can then allow you to do a lot more with sound early on. And similar to this, multiple lists, if you have a bigger project, is absolutely necessary. So if you have, not that you probably would, but if you had several hundred sound effects and dozens of music tracks and hundreds of voice lines, like we almost did last year, this is super useful because you can make different lists and boom, organization, my favorite word of the day. But if you do something like that, I would highly recommend a master list where everything is. But you would need to do some spreadsheet magic for that to update everything properly. So to look at the spreadsheet, and take note of the part 2 because that number is only going to keep getting bigger as I keep going through slides. But this is a template I built for myself off of the spreadsheet used by Hexany in the GDC talk I keep talking about. So here's half of it. I'll show the other half of it, and I'll just work through bit by bit. And for the drop downs, I use data validation. It's a pretty simple thing to do with Google Sheets. And just for the colors, I just clicked on the top, highlight the entire row or column, and then I just did conditional formatting. If it equals this, color it this color. So helps with organization. that phrase needs to be burned from my mind. I will not want to say this again, but I'm probably going to. So to get started with this, leftmost row, you got the event names. The example I gave there is just SX weapon sword swing. That's just the name of the event in Fmod, and yes, I do follow the same format just because it's a bit easier than just saying sword swing, because why not just be a bit more expansive on it and be as clear as possible. Then you got the bank. That's the Fmod bank that everything goes in. For the Unity project I'm currently working on, I swapped that word out with the mixer bus, I believe, or something like that, or mixer group. I just popped that there instead because that way I know where to route it. And one change I have actually made since I made this presentation is I have added a mixer group section. So there's the bank and then mixer group, just in case that's different, because I like to have a lot of control with the mixer and mixing, so just having those as two separate things is super useful. Then the asset type, it's a drop down. It's just one of those three things, the basic ones. And then I got category. It is a drop down, so it doesn't allow you to do everything. Like say if I wanted to do something that wasn't on this list, or I wanted to add a category, I could either type it in and have a error in that cell, or I can add it to the drop down, which is a bit more of a pain, but it's fine. So this only really completely applies to sound effects and music, which is a bit of a weak spot for voiceover. But universal NPC, UI, and player could apply to dialogue and voiceover as well. And the reason I did it like this is simply because I don't expect a ton of dialogue in our next game. In fact, I don't expect any. So we don't need it. I don't need it. I didn't really need to think about it. But in future iterations, or if you have dialogue in your game, or if it's very dialogue heavy, you might want to think about adding extra categories to make it a bit more specific for dialogue. All right, moving swiftly on, we got the play type. So we got one-shots, loops, or one-shot loops. The one-shot loop one, this would apply to something like the grapple hook that I brought up. So the beginning and end, those are just one-shots, but the middle bit loops as long as you're reeling in. So that would be an example of using both for one event. And to do that, I think I'll cover that in the Fmod session, since I need to figure out how to do it myself. The next few things, pretty self-explanatory. You got the level. If it's everywhere, or if it's not level specific, what I've written is uniform or universal. Or not uniform, I put universal. Uniform I put somewhere else, and we'll get to that. And that, as you can expect, just means it applies universally. The source, so that's basically just what it's attached to in the scene. And the trigger is what triggers the sound in-game. Not rocket science, it's exactly what you'd expect. And part 3, we got more. We got the asset name, which is pretty much exactly like the event name, except just with a number on the end. It's just the full proper asset name, just for the sake of clarity, and covering everything. And then this is where the fun part starts. You got the asset status, which is a drop down of a bunch of things, and this is basically tied to the creation of the asset and how that's going along. So we got blocked, that's if you can't do it for some reason. Not started, which is where most things will stay. In progress, which is where it'll stay after that. Awaiting approval is really only needed in the event that you need someone to double check it, or if you want someone to double check it, I would generally just leave it at that. And then if it sucks, they tell you it sucks. They tell you that you shouldn't be the sound designer of the group. Then you put it in revision needed, and then you redo it. If it's fixed, you put it in revised, and then once everyone's cool with it, it's approved. Or if you put it in revision needed, if you think, man, this sucks, let me fix it later, that'll just keep reminding you. And revision notes, as expected, this is where you put all the stuff that you would need to fix, in case you wanted it somewhere else other than your mind. Fmod status, so this is simply just what stage it's in being put into Fmod. As expected, it doesn't have as much or as many status updates as the other things would, because blocked, that generally won't happen. It won't happen to me, which is why I didn't put it in there, since nobody else touches Fmod. So all that, just, it's either implemented, it's not, it's in progress, or it needs revision, or it has been revised, or it's unused, which is the saddest option in all of these. Integration notes, that's anything specific you'd need to note, so like the tempo or meter for music, different parameters that you might want to include, different automation things you would need to do, or loop points, all that good stuff that would just go in there. And last but not least, the game status. It's the exact same status things as the asset status, and this is just whether or not it's in the actual game or being put into the game. It is super important to keep track of this because, believe it or not, it's really hard to tell if you're missing something unless it's a really important sound. So just having this in there, it's just easy for memory since you don't need to remember it, you just need to look. And production notes, that's just general things for the assets development that you want to make note of. So like if I was making a weird sound like the sword swing sound for our next game, I want it to have like a certain amount of energy to it, so that's something I would note in the production notes. And that's my spreadsheet. I can share that later in resources as well, because it took a little bit to make, but it's been super useful so far. All right, workflow. This is the next big section. If you start off with this asset list, like I said earlier in the session, and setting up the Fmod project, this will really help you moving forward. So once you get that started, the next part you'll likely work on will be controlled by the project manager unless they trust you. But either way, whether it's Hamrush telling me what to do or me just doing my own thing, I try to prioritize the important things, which logically that makes sense. But I just wanted to put it down here for the sake of just covering everything. So yeah, make sure you prioritize things. One thing I've seen in some asset spreadsheets actually is a drop down with priority. I didn't feel like it was super necessary to include it on mine since I could generally feel it out. If it gets to the point where it's a big spreadsheet or you have a ton of stuff you need to keep track of, having a priority is a pretty good idea. Some would even say it should be a priority to have that. Anyways, keeping the spreadsheet and project management stuff, all this good stuff that we've been talking about, keeping that up to date, super important. And just as important, being in constant communication with your team is honestly vital to making sure that everything's of high quality. So this includes stuff like showing your work to your team, getting feedback, and weekly scrums I've found are great for feedback. In the summer we did daily meetings, but we would have a big weekly scrum, and alongside those we would have a programmer meeting where they would just go over all the stuff that they were doing in their weird world, and there would be an art meeting, which is where I would play some sounds, get feedback, Hamraj would tell me I smell, and then we would all leave the call crying and go our separate ways and keep working. So doing something like that, even if it's just during the weekly meeting you have, and just being like, hey, listen to my thing, or even just dropping it on Discord and being like, hey, I did this, what do you think? It's great for feedback. It's generally necessary to improve. And just to go over the workflow with everything specifically, since this is about project management, you want to know how to manage each step of the way. So for sound effects, what I generally do is I plan. So I think, okay, what do I need? Do I need field recording? Do I need Foley? Do I need samples that I can find somewhere? I plan it out, record everything, get all the stuff I need. Then I edit it, slap it all together, layer things on, and then export one final sound. Then implement it, stick it in Fmod, integrate it, slap it in the game, and then iterate it. If it sucks, review it, make sure it's better. If it's fine, make sure it works as intended. Improve the mix. You can always improve the mix. Just always try to iterate and try to keep it improving at each step of the way. And one thing I just want to quickly say, the spreadsheet I made it in a way so that going left to right to the end of each row is a form of the workflow. So as you could probably guess from this part right here, if you can see my mouse, it's just going from the asset status to the Fmod status to the game status. You can't put it in the game unless the asset's made. So just going along one step at a time, not starting the Fmod status until the asset is done and approved. Yeah, I just thought it would be a good way to set up this so that it just works with the workflow. All right, now on to music. It's pretty much the same. You plan it out, so that's the instrumentation. You have to figure out what adaptive music system you're thinking of. Like, okay, am I doing layers? Am I going to be switching between parts? What am I going to do? And implementing it, you got to think about, okay, how's this going to work in the game with this system? So once you got all that figured out, you actually write the music, mix it, master it, all that good stuff. Once you got your beautiful track, slap it in Fmod, get it working, slap it in the game, make sure it works, and then once again, iterate it, improve the mix, always. And this is kind of a big one since I haven't really talked too much about voiceover throughout any of these sessions, really. But the planning stage is honestly the most important for voiceover. 100% make sure you have everything written before you do any sort of planning or any sort of recording. So plan out everything to a T. Plan out, okay, what characters do we have? Will they have dialogue? If they have dialogue, what will they sound like? What will they talk like? Will they just be making like weird guttural noises? Who's going to be doing the dialogue? Just think of everything. Make sure you have everything planned out. How's it going to be implemented? And then once you have all that planned out, that's when you start writing. Make sure you have everything written before you press that big red button. Just because if you add a line later, it could be difficult to get the same person back, or if you do get the same person back, you'll run into an issue that we will talk about in probably like 15 seconds. And one other thing I put under write, adding line variations is super helpful. It adds a lot of extra flair. I did that for our second year game, and I want to say we had at least like 200 lines of dialogue, something like that. We had a ridiculous amount of dialogue in our game. Half of it didn't even make it in, but most of it did, and a lot of it was made up of line variations. So you get shot, and you hear Anthony say about 5 or 6 different things each time you get shot. Or you go to the shop, and you keep clicking the buy item, but you don't have enough money. My buddy that I got to record that with, he keeps getting more and more angry at you and basically just saying the same thing. You don't have enough money for this, in funnier and funnier ways. That's all in the line variations. So adding that in increases the amount of sonic uniqueness, I guess. That's a cool way of putting it, for your game. And it adds extra flair, like I say. Now, about the big red button. On the record stage, make sure you record every single voice line for one character in one session, or as close as you could possibly do together. So if it's 2 sessions, try to get them back-to-back days. And the reason for this is because minor inflections can develop throughout the session. So the voice will 100% be different if you wait too long. And once again, just want to re-stress this. If you don't have all the lines for a character written, then just don't start recording the voiceover unless it's placeholder. And similarly to this, even if you think you have a voice, or if you're the one doing the voiceover, if you think you have a voice and then you go through all of your lines, do the first like 5 or 6 lines again, just in case your inflections change. Because that does happen. And I'm sure we've all seen this. 2 examples right off the top of my head I can think of are Doom Eternal, because I always need to bring that up legally. Samuel Hayden sounds one way in Doom 2016, and then when you find him again in Doom Eternal, he sounds a little different. It's the same robot, same dude, same tall boy, but he does sound a little different, and that's because the voice actor, as expected, has 4 years between playing the character again. And another really good example of a smaller time frame doing the exact same thing is with Nick Valentine from Fallout 4. He sounds one way in the game. He sounds, like Nick Valentine. That's what you hear. That's what you associate with him. But then you start up the Far Harbor DLC, and his lines for that DLC do sound a little bit different. You can't, it's still Nick Valentine. You can still hear it's him, but it's just a little bit off. It's the same voice actor, same everything, but it's just due to the fact that your voice actor or you will develop minor inflections throughout the session, and eventually, just over time, you will lose them. And as close as you can get them, even if it's like a month down the line, it's not exactly what you were doing in that first session. So just getting it all out of the way first is a great idea. That was long-winded, so I'm just going to keep going to the next point. Implement, integrate, iterate. The same 3 things that we've been doing for the last 3 things. And again, emphasizing the mix is important, improve it. All right, part 5 of the workflow. I told you we'd be on this one for a while. So, once again, always run things by your team, or even if it's not on your team, somebody that isn't you. So like my dad, I show him pretty much all the music I make when he's willing to listen to what I make, which it happens occasionally, so that's cool. But just get someone to listen to it, get someone to look at it, be like, okay, is this good? Is this trash? Do I need a career change? Do I need to be an artist or a programmer now instead? This is when you get that feedback. Because the thing about you or your team is that you might be biased toward or against something that's actually great, or actually bad. So you could be biased towards it. You could really like it because you've been hearing it for the past 6 hours, and then you play it for someone else and they're like, oh, I don't really know if that's exactly what we need. And then you wake up in the morning, you hear it again with fresh ears, and you're like, oh, I'm dumb, that sucked. Or other way around, you've been hearing the same 4 bars of music for the past 6 hours, you absolutely despise it, and then you share it to somebody and they're like, dude, this is amazing, this is fantastic, this is exactly it. So just get someone else to hear it. It's super important to iteration. If something sucks or if something could be better, this is where you're gonna hear the bulk of it. And just a little hint there, use the workshop channel, not just here. Use it in the GDSA main server, and this just goes for everything. If you have code that you want to share or something that you want feedback on art wise, just pop it in any workshop channel, get feedback on it. You will improve that way. And this is where I'm going to say the word Jira. Make sure you update your tasks, whether it's on Jira or Trello. Hell, even if it's just Discord and you have a channel that's, okay, what are you doing? And then you say that. Just keep your team in the know of what you're doing. And now onto tasks. I feel like I'm running a daily scrum saying onto tasks now. But something that does come with time and that you won't have immediately is being able to properly estimate how long things will take. Just because once you're starting out, or if you don't have a ton of experience, you won't know how long something will take you. But always I found to lean on the side of caution when you don't know for sure. Give a couple more days just of wiggle room, more than you think you need. And that way, if you get it done, cool, you got it done early. If you get it done at the last second and you had to spend the entire week pushing for it, cool, you still got it done in the time frame you said. Um, and using time tracking can be great for getting a concrete idea. So just a bit of a PSA about Clockify. Um, this isn't a talk about general project management stuff for the most part, like the one Hamraj did back in November, I want to say, for the GDSA. But using time tracking software like Clockify for your tasks, and using it properly and using it often will help you determine exactly how long things will take to complete. So that and previous work, those are really the only two metrics to judge how long it'll take to do something. And just as an example, a real world example of this happened, over the summer I had to rewrite the initials level music for our game, and that was a pretty big rework. The level changed completely. I couldn't use a good chunk of what I wrote, but I decided, you know what, I'll reuse whatever I can. I'll take every theme that I liked, I'll take certain chunks of it, I'll reuse it. And I just slightly tweaked the instrumentation. Hamraj asked me, okay, how long do you think this will take? And I said, okay, it'll take probably like a week or two. And it ended up taking just under a week, about 21 hours in total, as you can see there, bottom left. And later on, when we were doing the next level, he was like, cool, we have the next level. How long will this take? And just using the first level as an estimate, I was like, okay, this level is significantly longer. It's new material. It's nothing that I can just reuse and recycle. I have to think of new instrumentation, new everything for it, right? So I figured, okay, this will be about double the length. So it'll take about twice as long, right? Which, interestingly, it did take almost twice as long. Which is funny because I still did all the composing, arranging, mixing, all that, and had it in Fmod by the end of the week. But it did take me nearly 41 hours, which is almost twice as long as the 21 and a half. So once you have a process for a project, if you stick with it long enough, or even just a couple of weeks, eventually you'll be there and you'll be able to predict roughly how long things will take. There was a lot of weirdness with sound effects though, so definitely keep that in mind if you're doing sound effects. Since for a lot of it I did have to go out and field record, and that's generally what I'm still doing. But it'll take time and experience, and it'll become easier with time. Oh, I just need to breathe in for a second. Cool. All right. So similarly to that, with time tracking, setting deadlines, setting your due date for the task, when you're doing that, set a hard deadline. That way, just really make sure it gets done. Hold yourself accountable to that. And if you can't hold yourself accountable, try to get somebody on your team to do so as well, without just dumping all over their lawn and being like, hey, can you watch my stuff? Thanks. So again, anecdote about the past. We held daily meetings. They were like 10 to 15 minutes max. And we would just say, okay, we're doing this today. This is what we did yesterday between our last meeting and today. And this is basically what we would do. We would just say, cool, this is what I did. And if it was a Monday, we would say, cool, this is what I did on the weekend. If you had unhealthy work habits like me or Hamraj, actually no, everyone in this call that worked on that game had kind of unhealthy work habits. But yeah, generally we would just say what we did. So our team really relied on those at some points to really hammer in that things needed to get done. And even for people like me who didn't have other people down the pipeline relying on them, since my workflow is super isolated, I'm the only sound person, the only thing that really matters is, cool, I have a thing, let's put it in the game. Anthony, can you help me do that, because you can read and I can't. I still had a lot to do, even though nobody was really reliant on me. So if I slowed down, that would be a blocker for me in the future. So I couldn't really take the extra time to be lazy. I just had to get something done when it should be. So having people on your team that hold you accountable, like a great project manager or some great friends you have on your team that will literally crawl into your home, knock on your walls, and say, hey, do this. Just having that will ensure that you get things done on deadline, so that you can not only just work at a healthier pace, but also not need to get everything and cram everything in at the last second. On that note, though, you don't want to be the person that just dumps everything on somebody else's lawn, like I said. If someone's chasing after you to get something done, they're not going to enjoy it, you're not going to enjoy it. Just be consistent and reliable, and it'll be good. All right, and that is it. This is the GDC talk. I will put this in the resources chat right now. You will watch me right click it, and I will hit paste. There it is. So definitely watch that. It is incredibly helpful. Yeah, and that was the entire inspiration for this session. Thank you for coming out. My voice hurts. I'm gonna down this entire bottle of water beside me after this. But next week we've got an audio Unity audio deep dive. We'll be talking about a lot. It'll be great. And yeah, after that we have one of our 2 guest speakers immediately the week after. So keep an ear out for that. That'll be fantastic. Thanks for coming out. I'm gonna drink some water now.